All right. Hello. I'm very excited to be recording this video today on the Peacock, Venus, and the immortal body or the rainbow body. Now, I've had this topic swirling around in my head for weeks now, and I kept waiting because I thought, this really needs to be better structured. I want to put this more into a lecture format, but I felt like I really just couldn't do that. I felt like in this video, I was kind of just meant to speak from the heart. And so if you see me looking down at various points, this is just me going over some of my notes, which I will fully admit are all over the place because most of these notes have come through flashes of insight that I've had or transcribed from voice recordings I've done. And so just bear with me if things sometimes feel a little bit unstructured. I'm hoping that through this video, if you already have a base understanding of spiritual or occult science, that this will just help offer you a different framework in order to conceptualize these concepts that you already know and understand. And this is going to be mainly through the symbolism of the peacock, which there is so much symbolism to this beautiful animal that there's no way we could cover it in this one video. But we are going to be talking about its relationship to the immortal body and specifically its connection to the peacock angel in the Yazidi religion. We're also going to be talking about the peacock as the vehicle of many Buddhist and Hindu gods and goddesses, and also the relationship between Venus, the sun, the seven rays of creation, and the peacock. And then also looking at Christ as the symbolic white peacock. So, starting off, I actually really want to share an image that I made. So, let me see if I can do that. Share a screen. All right, hopefully this works. All right, hopefully you can see that. So this is actually an infographic from my Twitter, from my Instagram. I'll link those in the description if you have any interest in following. I post all kinds of things like this. And essentially, this is just an overview of the symbolism of the peacock. So the peacock overall symbolizes transmutation, resurrection, and immortality. Now, in ancient times, the peacock was believed to consume all sorts of poisonous things. Most significantly was its ability to consume a king cobra snake, a poisonous serpent, and not be harmed. And it was believed that this sort of acted like alchemy, and that any poison the peacock consumed only made their feathers more colorful, more radiant, more beautiful. And this really came to represent the actions of the great bodhisattvas who, through their loving sacrifice, choose to take on the poison, the suffering of this world, to really bind themselves to this cross of matter, to offer up a part of themselves for our own growth and evolution, and transmute all of that through the alchemical wisdom of compassion. And it's in taking on the suffering of the world and transmuting it that the bodhisattvas, just like the peacocks make their feathers more radiant, the bodhisattvas make their glorified etheric body or their resurrection body more vibrant and iridescent. And this is why it was said that the flesh of the peacock never decays, because the peacock represents this immortal body, or in the Eastern tradition, this rainbow body, which I really like the term rainbow body for this video, because when you think of the beautiful, colorful feathers of the peacock, I feel like it gets that point across so well. So I'm just gonna stop share. Okay, just go back to my notes here. Okay, all right. So, so it's very interesting with this symbolism of the peacock because we see many Buddhist and Hindu gods and goddesses pictured as riding a peacock or seated next to a peacock or even having like peacock feathers. We see this with one of the representations of Sanat Kumara. We also see this with the goddess Kuan Yin, who is this goddess of mercy, of compassion. And I really specifically like this imagery of the peacock being the serpent slayer, because when we hear about the serpent slaying the serpent, this really brings up this Luciferic impulse, which is often associated with this serpent, the serpentine energy within us. And so this often brings up the question, okay, well, how do we master that Luciferic impulse within us? And I think that these people like Sanat Kumara, Kuan Yin, and we'll get into Christ as well, are excellent examples of this, that essentially we are not trying to destroy the Luciferic impulse. We are trying to bring balance to it. And ultimately, we bring balance to it through the Christ impulse, which really is anchored within our heart. And the manifestation of this anchoring within our heart is the expression of this deep compassion, this deep mercy, and especially this impulse for sacrifice, which is so beautifully exemplified through these people. And so essentially, we reach this point of purifying our heart, of having mastery over the lower self, where our heart is cultivated to such a point that our natural instinct is for the liberation of all beings. The natural instinct is sacrifice. We're not doing this work with the goal of seeking out our own salvation or our own paradise. We have this karuna, this compassion in the Eastern tradition that is very much associated with action, of this action of sacrifice, where you are committed to the liberation of all beings rather than the goal of your own salvation, of living in your own paradise. And so it's also not about striving to be someone you're not. It's really about this clarity that comes with remembering who you really are, with removing the layers of falsities and illusions, and seeing what forms that diamond within you, and just kind of polishing off anything that has any impurities on that diamond to reveal its true nature. All of us, truly, as humans, are angelic. And this is something I really like about the Cathars, ancient Cathars. And I don't agree with, all of their beliefs, but they really viewed the human as angelic, and they felt like it was only this illusion of the material world, of this material body, that masked that. And they felt like when they shed the body, they would return to this angelic state. And I really, really like that, because it's truly in remembering who we truly are, in remembering our genuine angelic nature, that we are able to anchor this impulse within ourselves. If we're striving to be someone that we're really not, if we don't believe we're actually angelic, if we don't believe that that's who we really are, we are not really going to be able to embody that. We're going to look on all the lower parts of ourselves and say, oh, that's who I am. And this isn't about denying, the very real shadow aspects and the different karmic things that need to be purged and worked through. This is something we very much have to do when we commit to embodiment, when we commit to healing and transmutation. But it's in knowing that you're doing all of this to reveal your true self. And as we purify and as we cultivate, our natural impulse is going to be towards sacrifice. And so I think the peacock is a very beautiful representation of this, where we choose to go out in the world. And when we have this pure heart, we're not being naive. We're not believing that everyone is going to be great to us and all this nice stuff's going to happen. It's going to be all sunshine and rainbows. We have the bravery to go out with this pure, loving heart and know that our heart is likely going to be pierced at any moment. But we see the beauty in that vulnerability. We see the beauty in taking on the suffering of the world, having the bravery to truly come from that heart place and take on that suffering. And that ultimately is what is giving us true life, because it's cultivating this beautiful etheric body. So, how does this connect to Venus? How does this connect to the peacock angel and the Yazidi tradition? We're going to get into that a little bit right now. So, in the Yazidi religion, and I'm by no means an expert, but this is what I have read, there are 7 great angels, and we see that 7 is a very important number in occult science in general. We have the 7 circles of the seat of life, we have the 7 rishis, we have the 7 rays of creation, we have the 7 angels here. So in the Yazidi religion, there are these seven great angels that are essentially the emissaries of God. And the highest angel is seen as the peacock angel. And the peacock was really seen as the vehicle by which these solar forces, these higher forces, were able to be descended and manifested upon Earth. And so it was said that the peacock angel was what brought all of the colors to the Earth. Now, this is a very, very interesting metaphor here because we know that it is Venus, the planetary sphere of Venus, that essentially takes these higher solar forces and is able to refine them and kind of bring them down to us here on Earth in a way where we get the seven colors of creation. So, we have the sun goes through Venus, and then Venus brings it to us through these seven colors. And so I think it's very interesting here that the peacock is essentially taking on this role. It's really representing this role of Venus that is bringing these colors to the Earth, that is bringing these rays. And so, um, and so we see here that the peacock makes sense then to be associated with beings like Sanat Kumara. And Sanat Kumara is often actually equated with the peacock angel in this tradition, where essentially the peacock sacrificed itself, bound itself to the cross of matter, offered up a part of itself to descend and manifest these higher forces upon the earth to bring this beauty here. And once again, this all comes through sacrifice. And so I'm just going to scroll down here. All right. And so things can get a little bit tricky with the peacock angel, specifically within this Yazidi tradition, because it was an oral tradition for so many years, and it was only in the 1900s that foreigners started to try to transcribe some scriptures from it. And a lot was said to have been misinterpreted, and there were also surrounding cultural groups that greatly distorted some of their beliefs and misinterpreted them. So it can be very tricky in deciphering their beliefs, and there are also various versions of their creation stories. So I'm just going to be sharing some of them, but you have to remember that the Yazidi people themselves are ultimately the best judge on what is most authentic to them. So there is actually one version in which we see that the peacock angel disobeys God, but it was the right thing to do. So it was a test. God essentially says, I want you to bow to Adam. And the peacock angel refuses and says, I'm not going to bow to Adam. I will only bow to you, God, because, you are this ultimate supreme force. You are, this solar force. You are the sun, essentially. And this really showed the level of wisdom, the level of advancement of the peacock angel, and that it had passed the test and was really a guide to others on how to worship God. And actually, facing the sun when praying is very important in the Yazidi tradition because of the big emphasis on these solar forces. So essentially, this is one version that we get of the peacock angel, very, very elevated. And then in other versions, however, the peacock angel actually defies God and is seen as more of a fallen being. And I will say that this is not as regularly accepted by the Yazidi people. A lot of people have said that this comes from outside the religion and has been twisted by groups because of its similarity to a story in the Quran, so just keep that in mind. But essentially, in the telling of this story, God had said Adam was not to eat grain. And the peacock angel wanted humans to grow strong and all of that. And so he gave the humans grain, and this was seen as disobeying God. And he was therefore turned into a fallen being. And this really echoes these other creation stories where this Luciferic being, this light bringer, comes in and they try to give knowledge to humanity, and this ultimately ends in the fall. And interestingly enough, in the telling of this story, the peacock angel is actually redeemed and then risen higher. And so I found this very interesting because in this context, if we see the peacock angel as this more Luciferic being, but being redeemed, we know from an anthroposophical perspective that Lucifer, this Luciferic impulse, can be redeemed. It can be redeemed within ourselves. And so And this is ultimately redeemed through the Christ impulse. And in this story, the peacock angel is essentially has fallen into hell, but is able to resurrect himself back up as this high angel next to God. And it's also said that this angel's tears are what put out and extinguished the fires of hell. And so we just see this huge redemption arc, this huge focus on resurrection. And I really feel like this speaks just to our own redemption that had come about through this fall as part of this Luciferic impulse, but that we are all capable of being redeemed through this ascension cycle by having this balance in the Venusian energies that we're working with, because Venus is seen as the light bringer. It's often called Lucifer, and so we also have this dichotomy here, where originally these angels from Venus, which is not to say that they're non-human, but essentially higher humans. These beings from Venus, some of them decided to take on this sacrificial impulse and really bind themselves to the cross of matter to incarnate into humanity. And then this other group of beings sort of fell into that Luciferic impulse where they were part of the fall. And so this really shows us that we can really take one of two paths here, and that essentially we are trying to really balance the higher forces that we're working with. And it's essentially through this Christ impulse that we are redeemed, that we are resurrected into this rainbow body, into this resurrection body. And once again, I think this is very interesting when we think about the peacock and how the peacock angel was said to have brought the colors to earth, was also said to bring the 7 rays of creation, and bringing the rainbow. And there's actually a prophecy where it is said that the peacock angel will return and will return in the form of a rainbow, which once again, in the context of the rainbow body, this is very, very interesting to me. And I will say that this immortal body also is called the Venus body as well. And this is because Venus really is the twin sister to Earth, the etheric body of the Earth, essentially. And in the same way, the Venus body is really our etheric body, this glorified etheric body. Okay, so skip over this. And we also see this through Christ himself, and we know that Christians really adopted this symbolism of the peacock as representing resurrection and immortality. And specifically, we see Christ represented as the white peacock. And this can really be seen as Christ taking on the pure totality of these white sun forces. And so it was kind of different than in these earlier epochs where, we have these Venus essentially kind of bringing through these refined forces of the sun, right? And then here we see Christ really just taking on this totality of the white sun, really just opening up this new pathway for humanity. And so we see that with that beautiful, pure white peacock, that resurrected body, the resurrection body. And so just skimming over this, see if there's anything else I want to say about that. Okay. I'm actually going to read a quote. This is from occultworld.com/peacock angel. When the peacock angel descended into the physical dimension, the colors of the rainbow took the form of a peacock. Once again, we see here this connection where the peacock really is the vehicle of Venus. And continue on reading, which flew around the world, blessing every spot until landing in Lalish, now in modern Iraq. The Yazidis consider this the most sacred place on Earth. The peacock angel is responsible for Earth's beauty, especially flora and fauna. He is the protector and teacher of humanity, although he lives in a different dimension. Someday, in an apocalyptic time of great danger, he will return, probably as a peacock or a rainbow. In the meantime, he is everywhere all the time, and so devotees can always call upon his help. So I think that is very beautiful. And, I also want to go back to how it was said that the peacock angel extinguished hell, with his tears. And so I really see this as the tears of mercy, the tears of compassion, how it is really us in reclaiming this beautiful aspect of our hearts that we are extinguishing the lower parts of ourselves, that we are kind of mastering the death realms, that we are resurrected into this higher body. Um, and so, yeah. And then just seeing if there's anything else I want to say about that. Um, okay. And, I will also say that something else I love about the peacock is that it said that Kuan Yin specifically is also pictured with all of these peacock feathers because the eye on each feather represents the 1,000 eyes of the goddess who is always looking upon her children with compassion, with mercy, with forgiveness, who's always there to help. And I think this also, perfectly embodies um, that beautiful heart nature, that sacrificial nature that one develops when they become this bodhisattva. Um, okay. All right. Seeing if there's anything else here. Okay. Yeah, and there's actually a different version of this story where instead of Malak Taus, the peacock angel, being condemned to hell, instead, he consciously descended, saw the suffering and pain of the world, and cried. And his tears fell on the fires of hell, extinguishing them. And then, with hell extinguished, together with reincarnation, the Yazidis believe that the soul is born again and again into perfection until it ultimately merges into heaven. Um, all right. And so I think, you're seeing here that there's these two very different versions of the peacock angel, one in which there is the fallen and one in which there is the sacrificial. So the one who consciously descends and offers up a part of themselves, and the one who descends out of their own arrogance, right? Because in the other version of the tale, it was essentially the peacock being very arrogant and going against God's will. And I think that kind of speaks a little bit to our ego here. And yes, we are very much supposed to develop our individuality, develop our I. But when our free will goes against our higher will, this is when we start to fall. All right. But every single one of us is capable of this redemption, of this resurrection through the cultivation of this Christ impulse within ourselves.